Engaging citizens.
A game changer for development?
Citizen engagement in the public sector. My Rio.
Alessandro Rufino and I co-founded Meu Rio, which is My Rio in English. My Rio is a locally focused platform and network for civic engagement and people-powered political action that was created to ensure that all citizens of Rio could benefit from and participate to the decision-making processes that were shaping and changing our urban landscape. The network pools citizens' ideas and resources in order to simplify and improve the city life and to get our institutions more responsive and accountable and inclusive. So we work in two different fields. On the one hand, we develop web platforms for civic engagement in order to gather thousands of people for a specific cause. And on the other hand, we do on-the-ground actions in order to benefit from the fact that we are all in the city and that we can all meet each other and complement the online participation with a physical participation in the streets in the city. So My Rio is now counting with a community of 200,000 registered members and more than 65 public policies that were changed from the demands of the citizens of Rio. So basically what we do is that citizens come with specific demands for changing public policies, and what we do is that we help, they can create in our websites, in the pressure cooker, which is our main platform, where any citizen can create a campaign in order to change a public policy and pressure directly the decision maker that is responsible for the public policy. What we do is that over those almost 4 years, we have managed to change and to help to change more than 65 public policies in Rio. So we have a success rate, let's say, of 15% of each campaign that comes from citizens in order to change public policy, and the ones that were a victory. So that comes to a public policy change or creation of public policies. So it comes from changing and reshaping the system of sewage in a specific peripheral neighborhood in Rio that didn't have sewage before, to more regulatory questions in terms of public service and public administration. So I would like to share with you some of examples of those victories that I'm telling about, so that you can understand a little bit of our work and how we do things. A good example of public policy creation in Rio that was a victory of and came from a demand from citizens is the creation of the first police unit to inquire disappeared persons' problems and issues. So Rio in 2013 had more or less 6,000 people that went disappeared. It's a lot for a democracy, too much. Much more than during our military dictatorship in terms of a comparison. In only 1 year, we have 6,000 people missing. In 2014, there was the creation of a campaign from Jovita, who's a mother of a disappeared person, and she was asking for the creation of this police unit so that the police could inquire whether people that went missing and solving those issues. The police at the beginning didn't want at all, so it was politically really complicated and really complex. But Jovita started a campaign in Panela de Pressão, which is our platform, which in English will be the pressure cooker, where any citizen from Rio can create a campaign with his specific demand for changing a public policy and pressure directly the decision maker that is responsible for this public policy. So she pressured the Secretary of State for Security Affairs, and more than 15,000 people also pressured the Secretary. And it was a very beautiful campaign, and we pressured by email, by telephone, and after many meetings with the Secretary of State, and also of a lot of pressure from the streets and from the web, we got the creation of this first police unit. So it was a very important victory for Jovita, for all the mothers of disappeared persons in Rio, and also to our whole community, and of course for the city and the state of Rio de Janeiro. Another important case that we should speak a little bit about is in terms of creation of legislation. Many of our campaigns target the legislative power and parliament, specifically the local parliaments, and it got to change laws, bills, and amend the constitution. So one of the main important victories that we had was to change the state constitution, the constitution of Rio de Janeiro, in order to prevent that people convicted by corruption could be nominated to public positions. So the governor, the mayor, the parliament cannot nominate anymore for public positions people convicted by corruption. This was a very hard and complex campaign as well, and we pressured online, by telephone, by email, as I told you, by the pressure cooker, but also we've been physically and with hundreds of people in the parliament to approve this amendment. And of course we needed 2/3 of the House, and the House was not interested at all in this constitutional amendment. So it was a big victory of our community as well. In the end of 2012, a little girl who was called Bia, she was 11 by that time, and she created a campaign in the pressure cooker. And she was asking the governor not to demolish her school. Her school was the Frieden High School, which is one of the best schools, public schools in Brazil. It's the 10th best public school in Brazil. And it's just next to the Maracanã Stadium. And for the World Cup, the governor wanted to demolish and replace the school for a parking lot. There was an online city in there, and they simply didn't want anymore to demolish the school. So this was a very important victory for the community, and a very, very, very beautiful campaign, because it involved many students from 8 to 11 years old, and the parents and the teachers, and it was really, really beautiful campaigning. One other moving campaign that we did was a demand from handicapped people. There's an institute that protects the rights and the inclusion of handicapped people in Brazilian society. And they decided to create with us a campaign in order to adapt all the public equipments of the city in order to be accessible for handicapped people. And since Rio was receiving the Paralympic Games in 2016, it will be the biggest message that we could give to handicapped people, is that the city will convert in a more accessible city. The list of this will be to adapt schools, hospitals, etc., so public equipments, to be accessible for handicapped people. And by that time, they estimated that 2,000 public equipments were not accessible for the handicapped people. The idea was then to amend our budget bill that is voted each year by the city council in order to give enough budget and enough money so that the mayor could restructure and do the reforms that were necessary in order to adapt those systems. It was not expensive at all. It was like more or less $6 million per year in 3 years, which is, for a budget of Rio that is almost $10 billion per year, is nothing. So the idea of doing this amendment, we got big support, and we pressured a lot our city councillors, but unfortunately it was a defeat. But more important than the victories and the public policy changes that were really moving, and some of them really, and all of them really impactful for Rio society, the most important thing is that this community of action, has created and promoted more checks and balances to our political system. And we have a big problem, as the whole world has, but in Brazil specifically, we have a big problem and a big crisis of representation. So it's very important that we need to have citizens' infrastructure so that citizens can be mobilized and have the strength to counterbalance the power of our institutions. And this generates more democratic decisions and better decisions. So the most important legacy of those 4 years of Meu Rio is the creation of this community that is fully engaged and constantly engaged and observing and being a watchdog for the local parliament, for the city council and the mayor of Rio. And this is also why people from other cities in Brazil and the world want to replicate this model that was successful in Rio. So we created the Nossas Cidades network, which is our cities network, which mission is to replicate the model that we developed in Rio in other cities. So the first city where we implemented that was in 2014, was São Paulo. Minha Sampa, that's how it's called, our first little brother. And Minha Sampa is now a community of 50,000 people in less than 1 year and has changed many public policies. And also we trained other activists and social entrepreneurs from other 7 cities in Brazil, amongst Recife, Porto Alegre, Curitiba, Campinas and others, in order to also create those mobilization networks in their own city. So we share the methodology and we share all the technological tools that I told a little bit about in order to create those citizen infrastructure of mobilization in each city. And now in the current 2016, we will be expanding our work to other cities around the world. So we start with Latin America, where we have already many candidates from many cities and many important cities in Latin America, but also candidates from other parts of the world, such as Indonesia, Eastern Europe, and also South Africa. So we're now trying to figure out how we can work together, perhaps in a more global South agenda, and of course always focusing in the cities and sharing our methodology and learning one city with each other. We believe that creating citizen mobilization infrastructures is a great way of promoting more checks and balances within our political systems in the cities. And we believe that with more checks and balances, we can have more democratic decisions. And with more democratic decisions, we can come to better decisions. And we know that the cities are the focus of many of our global problems. If we think about climate change, 70% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from cities. If we think in terms of energy crisis, we have 80% of the energy that is used by the cities. And if we think about poverty and inequalities, we also see that on cities. So 1/3 of the developing cities of the population lives in slum-like conditions. So we believe that if we can manage to change our cities, we can change our world and put it back on track into a more sustainable and more just world. So, and we think this starts with the citizens and in the cities. That's why we work so hard to try to implement those civic engagement infrastructures in each city.